The fears of rookie pitcher Shane Smith running out of gas might be coming true. Could it cost him an all-star appearance? And let's discuss how the team should handle his exhaustion on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Shane Smith had his second straight poor start, and this time he can't hide behind a bad defense. Let's discuss how he should be handled going forward, and if he's going to be missing out on a possibly selected to the All-Star team. Then let's discuss the White Sox signing Noah Snydergaard to a minor league deal. Clear pitching depth signing, but also got me thinking I'd rather just keep Adrian Hauser and Aaron Savali after the deadline, given the alternative of Thor and Mike Clevenger eating innings in August and September. And then I'll finish up with a GM Chris Getz quote where it's pretty easy to jump to the conclusion that's going to be another cheap off season. All right, so like I said, Shane Smith, he can't hide behind bad defense. He can't hide behind Wrigley Field's, home run dimensions when the wind is blowing out. He just was not good yesterday against the Arizona Diamondbacks. And it was his second straight poor outing. And it's now has everyone wondering, is he out of gas? I mean, that was the talk on White Sox social media. Shane Smith, he's ran out of gas. He's done, in terms of, he's exhausted, that type of stuff. And that was the fear because he never pitched 100 innings in the minors. He's never pitched 100 innings, I think, in his entire amateur career. At least that is, noted on Baseball Reference. And he's already at 74 2/3 innings now. He only lasted 2 innings against the Diamondbacks, and this was not like the rough outing he had against the Cubs or the Mets. I mean, first, he responded better after his rough outings against the Cubs and the Mets, where he was, he got roughed up against the Cardinals, had a little bit of a bad defense in that first inning, I remember last week. But, against the Cubs, he bounced back the next start. Against the Mets, bounces back, has 2 good starts. But this one, he did not respond. He was terrible yet again. And the stuff just did not look sharp. He did not look downright nasty. I mean, there was only one of his strikeouts that he had where it was like, whoo, that's the stuff, all that impressive stuff that we've been seeing. And you got to wonder, as his ERA continues to rise, does this mean Miguel Vargas takes what was once Smith's assumed all-star spot? I mean, obviously, though, something needs to be done, as Smith is just 22 innings away from topping his career high he's had in his life, at least his professional life, which was 94 1/3 innings last year in the minors. I mean, they have to figure out how to handle him potentially tiring out, because he gave up 5 runs on 4 hits, walked 2, only struck out 2, and he gave up a big 3-run homer in the second. Team was down 5-0, and it was that 10-0 route was on. And he put the team in an early hole, and they just couldn't respond, especially after Rodriguez was just mowing down White Sox hitters. His ERA is now over 3, and what made him a sure bet this guy's going to be an all-star was that sub-3 ERA. I mean, you're pointing, anybody that had like a 2 ERA, those guys usually get, if they're starters, they get to the all-star game. But if he continues to get roughed up due to exhaustion, I fear that that's no longer a lock. I mean, I love what Vargas has been doing. I love what Miguel Vargas has been doing. But I would hate to see a poor June from Smith wreck what has been an all-star April and May. And when it comes to what is going on, I like what Jack Ankeny of Chicago White Sox on SI wrote. This is what he wrote. Smith tied his season high with 5 earned runs to go along with 4 hits, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts, and a home run. He also gave up 5 earned runs in his last start, meaning that 10 of his 28 earned runs this season have come in his last 2 outings. He said he tried to make adjustments after his last start against the Cardinals, and that his stuff felt good on Monday. He just wasn't around the zone. Quote, he's in a good spot physically, mentally. I think it's just a long season and a guy who's continuing to battle through his first major league season, Venables said. He's not going to be perfect every outing. It's on him to figure out how to get through some of these starts without his best stuff, end quote. Smith had an extra day of rest before his starts against the Astros and the Cardinals, but he went back to the typical 5 days of rest going into Monday's start. Prior to his start against St. Louis, he mentioned he could have done a better job of adjusting his routine. Quote, I think I felt better this week than last week. It didn't feel as long. I think I paced stuff out better during the week, but yeah, I think I could have made an adjustment there, but obviously didn't, end quote. Smith is up to 74 2/3 innings in his rookie season after Monday's start, not far off his career high of 94 1/3 innings in 2024, while pitching in double and AAA for the Milwaukee Brewers minor league system. Manager Will Venable and general manager Chris Getz have mentioned managing innings with some of the young pitchers this season, but there's no current plan to do that with Smith. And that's where I'm going to get super frustrated, folks. And, I'm reading Jack Ankeny. He had this quote. This is what Chris Getz on Monday discussed signing Hauser and Savali. And then, he talked about, because the other potential deal, potential solution, and I'll talk about in the second segment, is that they signed Noah Snydergaard to a minor league deal. This is what Getz said yesterday. Quote, the biggest value is being able to protect some of our young arms, but also know there was some upside in acquiring those players that perhaps that could help us at the deadline, end quote. And I want to get to that in the next segment as a little tease about how I'm very fearful that this team actually just doesn't have a plan and they're still in asset acclimation mode. But I get frustrated that they have no plan overall, it sounds like, but I'm going to give a small amount of a grace, at least when it comes to Smith, because I honestly believe the plan right before spring training, I honestly think the plan was when they drafted Shane Smith, the number one pick in the Rule 5 draft, was they did want to get a talented pitcher, give him a shot to start, but I think they were thinking, okay, it might be in that more swing starter role, kind of like what they signed Bryce Wilson. And that's, those two actually battled it out for the fifth starter spot. And probably the loser of that battle was going to be the swing starter, long relief man. And even then, I don't think they thought it was a long-term option because I think they were banking on Drew Thorpe returning from that bone spur elbow surgery and not thinking that he needed Tommy John surgery. I think they were also banking on maybe, top 10 prospects, Kai Bush and Mason Adams, not going under the knife for Tommy John surgery. I think they were just adding another talented young pitcher in Shane Smith and figuring, okay, all we have to do is just hide him in the bullpen if he doesn't beat out Bush, Adams, or Wilson in spring training. And that's, this is more of my assumption because it makes a lot of sense. Put him in the long relief role, spot starter role, kind of like what they're doing with Mike Vassell. But the injuries, and he had a great spring training. He earned a rotation spot. And that's kudos to him. Just like I hope he still earns an all-star spot. But I also do think maybe they do want to see how does he respond as he gets close to his career innings, which to me, though, is organizational negligence because you should be protecting these guys. These are valuable future players that you should be moving forward with. He could be a potential ace, as we saw in April and May. He's got that dude stuff. And we should already be, I would love for the front office, I would love for Getz to basically prepare us for the Garrett Crochet plan. Although my hypothesis is they want to win more than 41 games. And therefore, pitching Smith 4 innings a game can limit how much you can win, as we saw last year, put another figurative dollar mentioning the 2024 season jar. But that was a downside of only pitching Garrett Crochet 4 innings, was they had to use the bullpen the rest of the 5 innings, and they had a terrible bullpen last year. But you have a better manager this year who is realizing, hey, maybe we should try openers instead, and then have the young starter come in. Venable's been doing that. Maybe have an opener come in, pitch the first 2 innings for Smith, and then he pitches innings 3, 4, 5, and 6. There you go. So now you've spread out, getting through the lineup and that type of stuff. Or see what Brian Bannister, get him on the phone and let's see what the plan that they come up. But yeah, I believe Smith is clearly gassed. And it does, as I've said, it sounds like the White Sox are adding some depth by signing Noah Snydergaard to a minor league deal as he attempts a comeback. However, if it means him and Mike Clevenger pitching in August and September, just keep Hauser and Savali, and I'll discuss why after the break. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 13 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. And I think it's neat that it's completely online. Rugiet connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnMLB and use code LockedOnMLB to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnMLB and use promo code LockedOnMLB for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compound drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms, so make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so I'm fine with the White Sox adding veteran pitcher Noah Snydergaard on a minor league deal. I mean, it has, that old Kenny Williams vibe of signing a star player well past his prime. And by the way, on tomorrow's Way Back Wednesday, I will talk about the, all past their prime team. Shout out to Daniel Victor on X, formerly Twitter, for being the inspiration behind that. But I mean, this does reek of what we're getting this guy. We finally got our name guy, even though it's been 5-6 years since he was last effective. But he is 32, and the White Sox do need pitching depth. I mean, that is clear right now. They need pitching depth, even at AAA. Especially, too, if they are going to trade Adrian Houser and Aaron Savali at the deadline, which I kind of talked about on the first segment. Sorry about that. Had to quickly step away. I'm right back here now. So where I was, again, Thor, still 32, provides pitching depth. And if they do trade Houser and Civale, it means Syndergaard and Mike Clevenger are probably finishing out the season in the rotation. At least one of them. If, Cannon comes back healthy, Martin eventually comes back healthy, you got Burke and then Smith. But even then, maybe you do go to a 6-man rotation, and if Houser and Savali are gone, you're talking about Syndergaard and Clevenger, remember, he's still in Charlotte. When I look at that, I would just prefer the Sox just keep Houser and Savali rather than trade them for a mid-level prospect. Because I think that's what they're going to get. And even though it sounds like Getz, he sounds really excited to trade probably both of these veterans. It's like maybe the overall value of making sure those 4 young pitchers get through the season healthy, get through, that their arms are intact, might be better. Now, I get the White Sox are in asset acclimation mode. I get it. But ESPN's Jeff Passan even just had out the top 50 players that are available on the trade market, and he only ranks Luis Robert Jr. as, I believe, number 19. That's it. So it's not like they've got these valuable guys. So I get that while Houser and Savali are leaving after the season and probably in free agency, the value that they could provide, at least in giving yourself a chance to win, might be better. Because, yes, I know I've been preaching wins and losses don't matter this season, but at the same time, I have made a brief exception for at least give this young core a chance to win so they can learn how to do this thing called winning. And again, because they are going to need some veterans to get through. You just had Jonathan Cannon go on the 15-day IL. He might be coming back, but he did go on with a back issue. You also just put Davis Martin on the 15-day IL with a forearm issue. Although GM Chris Getz did say, I know everybody's freaking out that, is this a preview of another Tommy John surgery? He said it's more of a muscular issue. Probably could have pitched through it, but again, they're realizing, hey, we this is a season we don't have to ask a lot of guys to pitch injured. If they're exhausted, hey, you got to work through it. if you're just gassed, that type of stuff. Although, again, I would like to see them maybe, give Smith an extra day of rest. Can't hurt to go to a 6-man rotation, that type of stuff. Can't even hurt to go to a 7-man rotation with Mike Vassell. Although I might be getting a little bit too overboard there. But you still have to get Sean Burke more consistent, and he's going to be reaching his career innings too this season. So you got to figure out how to preserve these young arms as they start to build up the endurance to handle, 150 innings for hopefully the rest of the decade. Each season, hopefully, too. And Savali and Hauser, if they stick around, this is not going to be they're going to block anybody type situation like what happened when the White Sox kept Chris Flexen last year. Again, another figurative dollar into the jar. I mean, they don't have a lot of guys behind in now the minor league system that you can peg and say, oh yeah, let's see what this guy can do as a starter, because they're all on, all the guys that, for example, Flexen was blocking last year had Tommy John surgery. I mean, Bush and Adams were the two guys that was like, all right, let's see what they can do. Well, they're not going to be pitching this year. And Hauser has looked like the effective pitcher he was when he was with the Brewers, and not the terrible one like he was with the Mets last year. So again, he'll give you an opportunity to win some games. And if you want to say, well, Savali, he didn't want to be in Milwaukee. What makes you think he wants to stay in Chicago where they're losing? Well, the reason why he wanted out of Milwaukee is he just wants to start to showcase himself for free agency. So while I'm sure he'd love to be on a winner, he also wants to get paid starters money this offseason. So I think he's got the mindset of, hey, I got to go out and pitch well if I want to get paid again. Even if it's a 1-year deal, if I want a couple $1,000,000, making more money. One of the reasons why pitchers want to be starters, they make more. And yes, you could move them for some mid-level prospects. But again, the value of preserving these valuable young arms, the value of at least giving your core a chance to win night in and night out cannot be undervalued. And Syndergaard was last seen throwing 92 on his fastball and posting a 6.50 ERA and a 6.20 FIP in 2023. Clevenger struggled with his command earlier this season when the team, foolishly believed he could be a reliever. And his ERA is over 4 in Charlotte. And I just see Syndergaard and Clevenger, who also, remember, was terrible last year in 4 starts. And I'm not talking about the domestic issues, the character issues anymore. I'm putting him in a vacuum and his numbers. And it's no longer 2023. We've got some data lately that he's just not a good big league pitcher. I mean, maybe Brian Bannister can fix something in Syndergaard, but I would prefer that they just write it out with Hauser and Savali. But I will say this, because two things can be true. At least having Syndergaard and Clevenger provides you backup. At least you got backup in case there's more injuries. Although it's going to take Syndergaard probably 3-4 weeks, because he's going down to the Arizona, to the spring training facility, likely to get stretched out. And that's why I keep saying August or September is when you're likely looking about him even potentially getting an opportunity. And if you do bring up both, in case you do trade Savali and Hauser, just like I said, at least they're not blocking any, prospect's path to the big leagues. They're not going to take away precious developmental innings, because Noah Schultz, GM Chris Getz did talk about it yesterday, that there is a potential that he could get a taste of the show this season, but I think it would likely be in a relief situation or probably just as an opener. So there's really no one in Charlotte knocking on the door for a starting spot. Hagen Smith, last year's first round pick, he's just returning to game action after getting pulled to go to the spring training facility for a biomechanics lesson and heal that sore elbow. So really, I know I'm kind of just splitting hairs, because there is some benefits. I mean, hey, you could get something decent for Savali and Hauser. And hey, at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if you need Syndergaard and Clevenger to eat innings. But I wouldn't mind the team even getting creative and saying, hey, maybe we do need to go with the 6-man rotation. I would just still rather have Savali and Hauser around. But if this is the backup plan, because the Sox think that there's more value in trading Hauser and Savali, it could be a rough August. In September, GM Chris Getz spoke with the media yesterday. And well, he made a comment that should prepare us for another cheap offseason. And let's discuss after the break on Locked On White Sox. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you just stop managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. And I know my wife, she's getting all stressed out tracking all of our expenses, but no more since we started using Monarch Money. And we've been using it to make sure we can watch where we can cut on spending things we don't need and plan out saving for retirement, which for us is actually coming sooner than we think. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. And recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. Okay, so if you're in the super positive portion of the fan base, you're not going to like what Chris Getz had to say about next season's off-season spending plans. And hey, look, there's nothing wrong with being super positive or super excited about the future. My only critique is don't really shout down the people that are on the other side of the spectrum, the super negative, because they've got a whole lot more data that says usually when things are going well, it's probably going to go bad really, really quick. And I just caution, the price of being that positive when it comes to the White Sox is always going to usually be disappointment outside of 2005. And also remember, during the All-Star break, I got that episode series looking back on the 2005 World Series run. And the interesting theme that you will see is winning the World Series came when you least expected it. So usually when you have the lowest amount of expectations, it's usually when the White Sox end up surprising you. But even then, low expectations right now have been kind of a little frustrating because, I've even said when my meatball fandom takes over, it's like, oh, the White Sox are in it. They got a chance. And then they lose. It's like, oh, man. Although, again, disappointment is part of the penance you earn for being a White Sox fan. And me personally, I try to stay in the realistic or cautiously optimistic part of the fan base. But if you are in the super positive, thinking, okay, we got some core pieces, we're going to make some moves in the offseason, and maybe the team could be competitive by next year. Hate to break it to you, but it sounds like it will not be a major spending spree that's going to happen in the offseason. Here is what Getz said via Scott Merkin, WhiteSoxMLB.com beat reporter on X, formerly Twitter, about the offseason spending plans. And I've got the tweet up for those watching on YouTube. This is at Scott Merkin. Getz on future spending, quote, "It's really about supporting the long-term vision of the organization. We feel like if there's talent out there that we feel like can really help us, then we go out and do that. In the meantime, it's been a foundational approach. We're sticking to what it takes to improve all areas of the organization and not just relying on free agent spending. That time will come without question. We are much more focused on developing the crew we have up here and developing the players in the minor leagues," end quote. So, reading between the lines, you're not going to get Pete Alonso if he opts out, or Josh Naylor or Kyle Schwarber. Probably no Bo Bichette either. I bet you can kiss that reunion with Dylan Cease goodbye, because it just was clear that all he had to say, all that was left out was, again, we're not going to do the heavy lifting in free agency. And it makes sense, as realistically, this team needs more young talent than being propped up by veterans. They really do. And you could say, oh, they just do. And you do want young talent. You always want young talent, not just because they're cheap players, because that does drive me nuts. And if you're the one that is, it's just like, hey, let's be a big market team like they are. I agree with you on that, but you still always want young, talented players, not because of cheap contracts, it's because they're usually going to be in their peak performance years. So that's why, yeah, they need they need at least 2 more drafts of infusion of talent. And they need to maybe see if they can leverage a few of these veterans, although it's going to be hard because I don't see any significant returns for Dan Altavilla or Steven Wilson. So when it comes to that, it's going to be hard to get premium talent if they're not going to spend any money in free agency. They no longer have the trade assets. That's why you're going to have to go through the draft. Although I would prefer to see next offseason the team maybe spend just a bit more on the bullpen like they should have done this past offseason, and maybe just a tiny bit more on first base since there's really no clear option. Maybe another veteran starter, that type of stuff. But the reason why I'm willing to make my exception to the rule of, hey, you shouldn't be spending too much money on your bullpen because Jerry Reinsdorf still owns this team is, like they should have done this year. Putting resources in the bullpen is so that you can flip them at next year's trade deadline. Because again, I don't foresee the trade deadline market being awful to bullpen arms anytime soon. Okay? If I'm loud wrong this trade deadline, I'm loud wrong and I'll take it. But I don't see it because bullpen arms are cheaper. And they definitely are going to come cheap in 2026 because that's the last year of the CBA. Remember, we're going to have a huge labor war after 2026. And that's another reason I can actually see it making sense to not spend big money since it's unknown what the next CBA will look like. It's unknown what club control is going to look like. The owners are going to try everything they possibly can to get a salary cap. Is it going to be a soft cap or is it going to be a hard cap? And if it's a hard cap and there's no grandfathering in or smoothing in, it would be nice then to have flexibility from the start. It would be nice to be like, okay, we've got some money now. Plus, outside of like Kyle Tucker and Bo Bichette, it's not like there's these elite young players to help speed up the timeline in free agency that would provide sustained success. There's just a lot of bridge guys. So maybe, it can't hurt to spend just a little bit more money, like stop shopping for Michael A. Taylors and Austin Slaters of the world. Maybe spend a little bit more for a better bridge player. I agree with that, but I kind of see the logic in it. But just phrase it better. Always phrase it better. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with a Way Back Wednesday segment. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding Shane Smith tiring out, the Sox adding Noah Snydergaard, and the GM pretty much saying he will not be spending much in the offseason. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.